I was standing ankle-deep in the imported Japanese koi pond I had spent 3 years building by hand, pruning a blooming water lily, when my phone vibrated so violently against my hip, it almost fell into the water. It wasn't a single text. It was a rapid-fire barrage, a digital machine gun tearing through the quiet Saturday morning sanctuary I had literally bled into the soil to create. I wiped my muddy hands on my jeans, unlocking the screen to find a photo of my own backyard, a drone shot, stolen from my personal Instagram, slapped with a nauseatingly elegant cursive font that read, "The venue is secured. Chloe and Chase forever." The caption beneath it, posted to an audience of 80,000 strangers, didn't ask a question. It was a royal decree. So blessed to announce that my amazing cousin has gifted us their stunning estate for our big day. Can't wait to transform this space into our perfect boho chic fairytale. Guest list drops tomorrow. My stomach plummeted. I hadn't agreed to this. I hadn't even been asked. And as the family group chat exploded into a cacophony of celebratory emojis and praises for my generosity, I realized with a cold, terrifying certainty that my home was no longer mine. It had just been annexed by the family's golden child. To understand the sheer, unadulterated audacity of that post, you have to understand what this house means to me. It is not just a piece of real estate. It is the physical manifestation of my independence, my grueling 80-hour work weeks, and my desperate need to carve out a quiet corner of the world where my family's chaos could not reach me. I bought the property 5 years ago when it was nothing more than a derelict mid-century ranch sitting on 3 acres of overgrown, aggressively neglected land in a semi-rural pocket of the county. The previous owners had let nature reclaim it entirely. When I first toured it, the real estate agent wouldn't even walk past the back patio for fear of stepping on a rusted nail or disturbing a hornet's nest. But I saw the bones. I saw the massive, centuries-old weeping willow anchoring the far corner of the lot. I saw the gently rolling slope that begged for terraced gardens. For 5 years, I poured every ounce of my disposable income, every weekend, and every vacation day into the dirt. I cleared the brush by hand. I laid the flagstone pathways stone by heavy stone, destroying my lower back in the process. I planted rows of hydrangeas, stringlit a custom-built cedar pergola, and installed the aforementioned koi pond, complete with a cascading waterfall feature that masked the distant hum of the highway. It was an oasis. It was pristine. It was mine. It was the one beautiful thing in my life that I had achieved entirely without the help or interference of my family. And that, of course, is exactly why Chloe wanted it. Chloe is my maternal cousin, though cousin feels like an insufficient word to describe the black hole of attention and resources she represents within our family tree. She is 2 years younger than me, but from the moment she was born, she was treated as though she had descended from Mount Olympus. My Aunt Susan, my mother's overbearing, deeply competitive sister, decided early on that Chloe was destined for greatness, and by greatness, I mean localized fame and perpetual adoration. Chloe grew up believing that the word no was simply a suggestion for other, lesser people. If Chloe wanted the lead in the school play, Aunt Susan bullied the drama teacher until she got it. If Chloe wanted a specific dress for prom that was out of her parents' budget, the extended family was expected to chip in to make her dreams come true. We were not a wealthy family, but you would never know it by looking at Chloe. She was subsidized by the collective guilt and enabling of a dozen aunts, uncles, and grandparents. I, on the other hand, was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who got good grades, worked part-time jobs since I was 15, and never asked for anything. In my family's eyes, my independence was not something to be proud of. It was simply a convenience. It meant they didn't have to worry about me, which freed up more emotional and financial bandwidth to focus on Chloe. Whenever I achieved a milestone, it was briefly acknowledged before the conversation invariably steered back to whatever minor crisis or triumph Chloe was experiencing. When I graduated from college with honors, the celebration dinner was cut short because Chloe had a massive audition for a local car commercial the next morning and needed her beauty sleep. She didn't get the part, and somehow, her depression over the rejection overshadowed my degree for the next 6 months. Over the last few years, Chloe had found her true calling, becoming a mid-tier lifestyle influencer. She hovered around 80 to 90,000 followers across platforms, projecting an image of effortless, boho-chic affluence. Her entire life was curated for the grid. Everything was beige, pampas grass, oversized hats, and sponsored posts for dubious wellness teas. She didn't actually do anything, she just existed aesthetically. Her fiancé, Chase, was a remarkably bland man with good hair who seemed perfectly content to act as her Instagram boyfriend and occasional prop. When they got engaged 6 months ago, the family braced for impact. The wedding was never going to be a celebration of love, it was going to be a content creation event. A massive, multi-tiered campaign designed to push Chloe over the coveted 100,000 follower mark. For months, Aunt Susan had been dropping hints at family gatherings about how expensive venues were, and how unreasonable the wedding industry had become, and how a true family would pull together to provide a space. I had ignored these hints, sipping my coffee and staring blankly at the wall, assuming they were aiming for my uncle's decent-sized suburban backyard. I never imagined she would come for my sanctuary. I stood paralyzed by the pond, staring at the screen of my phone. The family group chat, titled the Fam Bam, a name I loathed but lacked the courage to leave, was vibrating nonstop. Aunt Susan, so incredibly generous of you. Chloe has been crying tears of joy all morning. Uncle David, way to step up for the family, kiddo, looking forward to the big party. Mom, I told Susan you wouldn't mind. Your yard is so pretty, it's a shame nobody ever sees it. This will be so good for you to host. I told Susan you wouldn't mind. My mother had volunteered my home, without a phone call, without a text, without a passing question. My vision blurred with a sudden spiking rage. I tapped Chloe's contact and hit call. It rang twice before she answered, her voice dripping with artificial, syrupy sweetness. Hey, cousin, she chirped, the sound echoing slightly, probably on speakerphone while she did her makeup. I am just so overwhelmed by your generosity. Honestly, when Aunt Susan told me you wanted to host, I didn't, I interrupted, my voice trembling but flat. I didn't say I wanted to host, Chloe. I don't know what my mother or your mother told you, but I was not asked, and I did not agree to this. You need to take that post down immediately. There was a pause on the line. The sugary tone dropped instantly, replaced by the sharp, defensive edge I had known since childhood. Excuse me? Are you joking right now? It's already live. People are already commenting. Brands are already reaching out for sponsorships based on the venue aesthetic. I don't care about your brands, Chloe. It's my house. It's my backyard. You can't just announce to the internet that you're getting married on my property without my permission. Oh my God, why are you being so dramatic? She sighed loudly, the sound of a makeup brush clattering onto a counter. It's just a backyard. You literally live alone out there in the middle of nowhere. What else are you doing with all that space? It's sitting there going to waste. I'm actually doing you a favor by bringing some life into that boring place. It's not going to waste. It's my home, and I am not hosting a wedding. Do you have any idea what goes into hosting an event? The liability, the wear and tear. You're being incredibly selfish, she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. This is my wedding. My one special day. You know how hard Chase and I have been trying to find a venue that fits our vibe without charging $50,000. We're family. Family helps family. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult? Before I could respond, the line clicked, and Aunt Susan's voice boomed through the speaker. She had been listening the whole time. Now listen here, Aunt Susan barked, deploying her ultimate matriarchal authority tone. Your mother and I discussed this weeks ago. You have a beautiful yard that you do absolutely nothing with. Chloe is your family, she needs a venue. It is completely unreasonable for you to hoard that property when your cousin is in need. We are not asking you to pay for the wedding. We are simply telling you that we will be utilizing the space. You should be honored, she thinks it's pretty enough for her photos. Susan, it's a liability. I tried to inject logic into the madness, pacing back and forth on the flagstone patio. I have delicate landscaping. I have a koi pond. I don't have the plumbing or the infrastructure for a crowd. We're not going to ruin your stupid fish pond. Chloe yelled in the background. We are having the wedding there, and that is final, Aunt Susan stated, a terrifying finality in her voice. If you try to ruin your cousin's special day because of your petty jealousy, I will make sure the entire family knows exactly how cruel and unsupportive you are being. Do not embarrass us. Do not embarrass Chloe in front of her followers. We are coming over tomorrow afternoon to do a walkthrough and map out the ceremony space. Be there." The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear, the silence of my backyard suddenly feeling suffocating. The gentle splashing of the waterfall, usually a source of immense peace, now sounded like a ticking clock. I looked out over the expanse of my lawn. I pictured 200 people trampling the imported moss I had painstakingly cultivated. I pictured stiletto heels sinking into my aeration project. I pictured drunk strangers tossing discarded plastic cups into the koi pond. My phone buzzed again. It was a direct message on Instagram from Chloe. It was another screenshot of my yard, this one with crude, digital red circles drawn all over it. Thinking ceremony under the big ugly tree, we can dress it up with some chiffon, dance floor over the patio. You'll need to move your outdoor furniture out of the way before we get there tomorrow. Also, Chase thinks the pond is a drowning hazard for the flower girls, so we're gonna need you to drain it or board it up for the weekend. See you tomorrow, sparkling heart. Drain the pond, board it up, move my furniture. They weren't just demanding my property, they were demanding my submission. They were stepping into my sanctuary, wiping their muddy boots on the floor, and demanding I thank them for the privilege. I sat down on the edge of the cedar bench, dropping my head into my hands. A familiar, sickening feeling washed over me, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's collective will. For 30 years, I had bent. I had accommodated. I had kept my mouth shut to keep the peace. I had moved away, bought this house, and built a moat around my life specifically to escape this exact dynamic. But they had breached the walls. I looked up at the weeping willow, its branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. The sheer entitlement of it all was paralyzing. If I said no, if I locked the gates, the family would go to war. My mother would show up crying. My aunt would launch a smear campaign, so vicious it would fracture the entire extended family permanently. I would be branded the villain, the jealous, bitter cousin who ruined the influencer's dream wedding out of spite. They would never stop punishing me for it, but if I said yes, if I gave an inch, they would take the entire acreage. I scrolled back up to her initial text. Guest list drops tomorrow, 200 people, in a residential zone. With no warning, a cold breeze swept across the patio, chilling the sweat on my forehead. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out a furious, bridge-burning refusal. But as I stared at her ridiculous, entitled demands, a tiny, unfamiliar spark ignited in the back of my mind. A dark, quiet realization about the reality of hosting a massive, highly publicized commercial event in a strictly regulated suburban municipality. They didn't just want my yard, they wanted the aesthetic of a high-end venue without any of the high-end rules. They wanted a fairy tale without paying the toll. My phone vibrated one last time, a text from my mother. "Please just do this. It's easier to just let Susan have her way. You know how she gets, just smile and play along for me." Smile and play along? I stared at the screen until it went black. The panic in my chest slowly, strangely, began to recede, replaced by a cold, glacial calm. I looked around my pristine, beautiful yard. Tomorrow they were coming to claim it. Tomorrow the invasion would begin. They expected a fight, or they expected submission. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, picking up my pruning shears. I looked at the dark water of the koi pond. "All right, Chloe," I thought, the sound of the waterfall rushing in my ears. "You want the venue? You can have the venue." The rest of Saturday passed in a blur of restless, calculated quiet. I didn't reply to Chloe's text about draining the pond, nor did I respond to the increasingly frantic messages from my mother pleading with me to keep the peace. I spent the evening doing something I hadn't done in years. Reading through the municipal code of our township. I sat at my kitchen island with a glass of whiskey, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the dense, bureaucratic text of our local zoning laws, fire ordinances, and sanitation requirements. The more I read, the more the cold weight in my chest transformed into something sharp, clinical, and precise. They wanted a war of emotions, of guilt, of familial obligation. I was going to give them a war of paperwork. By Sunday afternoon, the weather was brutally perfect. The sun was high and hot, casting a brilliant, golden hour light across my backyard that I knew Chloe would find absolutely irresistible for her grid aesthetic. At precisely 2 o'clock, the gravel in my driveway crunched violently. I looked out the kitchen window to see a pristine, pearl-white luxury SUV pull up. It didn't park in the designated gravel turnaround. Instead, whoever was driving steered the heavy vehicle directly onto the soft, manicured edge of my front lawn, the deep treading of the tires tearing into the emerald turf I had spent the last 2 months overseeding and fertilizing. My stomach clenched, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. I opened the front door just as the vehicle's engine cut out. Out stepped the vanguard of my misery. Aunt Susan emerged first, wearing oversized designer sunglasses that obscured half her face, her posture stiff and managerial, looking less like a wedding planner and more like a corporate liquidator preparing to gut a failing factory. From the passenger side climbed Chloe, dressed in a flawless beige linen sundress, an oversized straw hat tilted back on her head. She didn't look at the house or at me. Her arm was already extended, her phone clutched in her hand as she panned the camera across my property, narrating something in a hushed, breathless vocal fry to her digital audience. From the backseat emerged Chase, carrying a heavy camera body attached to a motorized stabilization gimbal, looking thoroughly exhausted but entirely compliant. Finally, my mother stepped out of her own car, which had pulled up behind them. She caught my eye immediately, her face a mask of nervous, apologetic pleading. She gave me a tiny, tentative wave that practically begged me not to make a scene. "Oh, it's smaller than it looks in the photos," Aunt Susan announced by way of greeting, stepping over the ruined patch of my front lawn without a glance. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She simply marched past me into the house, treating my front door like a revolving entrance to a public park. "Hey, cousin," Chloe called out, her voice shifting instantly into that high-pitched, performative sweetness the moment she realized her phone camera might catch me. She lowered the device for a fraction of a second. "The lighting out here is literally insane today. We are going to get so much content. Move out of the way, Chase. I want to get the reveal shot of the pergola." I stood on the threshold, watching them invade. They didn't wait for an invitation. They didn't ask if they should take their shoes off. They moved with the absolute, terrifying confidence of people who believed that everything in their peripheral vision belonged to them by right of birth. "Let's go straight to the back," Susan commanded from inside the hallway, her heels clicking loudly against my white oak hardwood floors. "We don't have all day. The florist needs the spatial dimensions by 5, and I still have to coordinate with the linen rental company." I closed the front door and followed them through the house. As we stepped out onto the cedar back patio, the true scope of Chloe's delusion began to unravel. Chloe walked down the steps onto the flagstone path, her straw hat bobbing as she looked around. She didn't see the years of backbreaking labor I had poured into the soil. She didn't see the carefully curated native plants, the delicate ferns nestled in the shade of the stone walls, or the hours of pruning that kept the hydrangeas blooming in perfect, symmetrical clusters. To her, this was just raw material. This was an unpainted canvas that had the audacity to have things already painted on it. "Okay, so first things first," Chloe said, turning in a slow circle while Chase trailed her with the camera, the gimbal whirring quietly. "That tree has got to be modified." She pointed a manicured nail directly at my weeping willow. The tree was the crown jewel of the property, a massive, ancient giant whose sweeping, delicate branches cascaded nearly to the ground, creating a private, shaded cathedral beneath its canopy. "Modified?" I repeated, my voice deliberately neutral, keeping my hands buried deep in my pockets so they wouldn't see them shaking. "Yeah, the lower branches are way too low," Chloe said, dismissively waving her hand toward the tree. "When I'm standing at the altar with Chase, the leaves are going to block the side-angle drone shots. It ruins the symmetry of the lens. We need you to take a chainsaw or whatever and just clear out the bottom 6 or 7 feet of branches. Just chop them off so the camera has a clear line of sight from the driveway. Chop off the lower canopy of a 200-year-old willow," I stated, letting the words hang in the air. "Exactly," Aunt Susan chimed in, pulling a tape measure from her designer purse. "And while you're at it, this fence needs to be addressed. The dark wood is completely wrong for the vibe." Chloe's palette is strictly warm neutrals, pampas grass, and terracotta. This weathered cedar look is too rustic. It looks old. You'll need to paint it a solid, matte cream color before the rehearsal. We can buy the paint, but you'll need to apply it so it looks uniform. I watched Aunt Susan walk over to my hand-stacked stone retaining wall, tapping it with the toe of her shoe. And these rocks are uneven. We're going to have elderly relatives here, someone is going to trip. We'll need to lay down some outdoor carpeting or plywood over these pathways to smooth it out. I looked at my mother. She was standing slightly behind Susan, wringing her hands, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate message. Just say yes, please, just don't fight them. And the fish, Chloe said, walking over to the edge of the koi pond. She peered down into the crystal-clear water, where 7 large, brilliantly colored Japanese koi were swimming lazily around the base of the water lilies. They're a total distraction. Look at that bright orange one. It completely clashes with my theme. If someone takes a photo of the reflection in the water, that orange is going to stick out like a sore thumb. Plus, Chase looked it up, and having open water right next to the seating area is a massive liability. What if a guest gets drunk and falls in? What if a flower girl drowns? It's totally unsafe. So, Chase muttered, speaking for the first time all afternoon, his eyes fixed on his camera screen, we think the best move is to just drain it. Just pump the water out into the woods for the weekend, put a heavy plywood deck over the top of the hole, and we can use it as the base for the DJ booth. It'll save so much space. The sheer, staggering ignorance of the request was almost breathtaking. They were casually discussing the murder of thousands of dollars worth of living creatures and the destruction of a delicate ecosystem I had spent 3 years balancing. All because an orange fish didn't match a social media color scheme. Drain the pond, I said, my voice dangerously soft, and put a DJ booth on top of it. Yeah, Chloe said, already losing interest in the pond as she walked toward the cedar pergola. It's just for 4 days. You can just fill it back up after we leave. The fish can go in buckets or something, right? Or you can just buy new ones. They're just goldfish. They're imported koi, Chloe. They breathe oxygen. They require an established biofilter. Oh, don't start with the technical jargon to get out of helping your cousin, Aunt Susan snapped, turning on me with a sharp, scolding glare. You always do this. You make everything sound like a mountain when it's a molehill. It's a party. We are trying to plan a beautiful memory for your family, and all you can do is stand there and complain about fish and branches. Frankly, your attitude is incredibly disappointing. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold, clinical calm of the previous night wrap around me like armor. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile, but it was enough to make my mother let out a visible sigh of relief. I'm just trying to make sure we understand the logistics, Aunt Susan, I said, my tone smooth, accommodating, and utterly cooperative. If we're going to make this the perfect wedding, we need to talk about how the event actually functions. Let's go inside, sit down at the kitchen table, and look at the numbers. I want to make sure Chloe gets exactly what she deserves. Chloe beamed, turning her phone back toward herself. See guys, I told you they'd come around. Family always wins. Wedding planning blessed. We marched back inside, the entourage filing into my kitchen. I pulled out the bar stools and the chairs around the dining table, offering them drinks which they declined, except for my mother, who eagerly took a glass of water just to have something to hold. I walked over to my desk, picked up the yellow legal pad I had filled with notes the night before, and took my place at the head of the kitchen island. All right, I began, clicking a pen. Let's talk about the guest count. Chloe, your post said the guest list drops today. What is the final number of attendees? 200, Chloe said proudly, leaning her elbows on my clean quartz countertop. Well, 200 invited. We're expecting at least 180 to show up. Plus vendors, the media team, the catering staff, and a few local lifestyle bloggers I invited for networking. So let's say 210 total. 210 people. I wrote the number down at the top of the page, pressing hard enough to leave an indentation through the next 3 sheets. Excellent. Now, let's talk about food and beverage. Where is the catering company setting up? Aunt Susan stepped forward, pulling a thick, glossy binder from her bag and slapping it onto the counter right over my neatly arranged coaster set. That's actually where you come in. We looked at the pricing for full-service catering crews, and it's absolute highway robbery. They want $15,000 just for a basic buffet, plus service fees, plus a premium because it's a residential location. It's ridiculous. So what's the plan? I asked. Well, Chloe wants a gourmet grazing table for the cocktail hour, and then a high-end, family-style artisanal taco bar for the main course, Susan said, sliding a printed menu across the quartz. We've already pre-ordered the bulk ingredients from a wholesale supplier. It's being delivered here on Thursday morning. Since you have this gorgeous double convection oven and that massive commercial refrigerator, we figured you could act as the kitchen coordinator. You love to cook, and you're so organized. You can prep the ingredients on Thursday and Friday, and then on Saturday, we've hired a couple of college kids from down the street to actually put the food on the platters and pass them out. You'll just need to manage them, keep an eye on the ovens, and make sure the hot food stays hot. I looked down at the menu. It was a logistical nightmare of raw meats, delicate seafood ceviches, and complex assembly items that required professional food safety handling, precise temperature controls, and constant refrigeration. They weren't asking me to warm up some frozen pizzas. They were ordering me to run an unpermitted, high-volume commercial kitchen out of my private home for 200 strangers, completely unpaid, while acting as the scapegoat if anyone got food poisoning. So I am the head of catering and kitchen operations, I stated, writing catering, protagonist on the pad. It just makes sense, Chloe said, adjusting her straw hat. You know where everything is in the kitchen anyway. It would be so awkward to have a bunch of strangers running around your space. This way, it stays in the family. Perfect, I said, keeping my voice entirely level. Now, let's move on to infrastructure. This is the most important part of hosting a large-scale event. Let's start with sanitation. This house runs on a private septic system. It is rated for a single-family residential home with a maximum occupancy of 4 bedrooms. That means the tank and the drain field are designed to handle the daily waste of about 6 to 8 people on a continuous basis. Aunt Susan rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, dramatic sigh. Oh, here we go again with the plumbing. Why are you obsessed with toilets? Because, Aunt Susan, I said, leaning forward and tapping the legal pad with my pen. 210 people drinking alcohol, water, and soda for a 6-hour period means your guests will utilize the restroom an average of 3 to 4 times each over the course of the evening. That is over 700 individual flushes in a 6-hour window. A standard residential septic tank cannot process that volume of liquid waste in that short of a time frame. The water level will rise faster than the bacteria can break it down. The drain field will become completely saturated, and by hour 3 of the reception, raw sewage will begin to back up through the lowest drains in the house. It will flood my guest bathroom, fill my shower pans with black water, and ruin the entire plumbing system. The cost to dig up and replace a collapsed septic drain field is roughly $15,000 to $20,000. My mother gasped, dropping her glass of water slightly onto the table. Oh dear, is that true? It is a mathematical certainty, I said, looking directly at Chloe. To prevent a literal fountain of sewage from ruining your aesthetic mid-reception, we need to rent portable sanitation. I looked it up this morning. You can rent a luxury restroom trailer, the kind with air conditioning, running water, and faux wood flooring so it looks nice for your guests. For an event of this size, you will need a 3-station unit. The cost for the weekend is $2,500, plus a delivery and hookup fee. Chloe's face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. $2,500? For toilets? Are you insane? Do you know what that does to my budget? That completely wipes out my budget for the floral arch. It's an absolute scam, Aunt Susan barked, her face flushing red with sudden anger. $2,500 to lease plastic boxes filled with chemicals? Absolutely not. I have never heard of anything so ridiculous. We are not spending a single penny of Chloe's hard-earned money on a portable toilet. It is ugly, it ruins the view of the yard, and it is completely unnecessary. Your house has 3 bathrooms. The guests can just walk inside and use them. People do it all the time at house parties. A house party is 30 people, Susan, I said calmly. This is 200. I don't care if it's 500. Susan slammed her hand on the binder. We are not renting toilets. You are just trying to pad the bill to make this difficult for us because you don't want to host. Well, too bad. The venue is locked in. The guests are coming. They will use your bathrooms, and you will just have to make sure they are clean. No toilets. Got it, I murmured, my pen scratching across the paper, creating a beautiful, permanent record of her refusal. Let's move on to parking. My driveway can accommodate exactly 4 vehicles if we park them bumper to bumper. Where are the other 60 to 70 cars going to park? Chase looked up from his camera, frowning. Can't they just park on the street? This is a 2-lane semi-rural county road, I explained, turning the legal pad toward him. There is no paved shoulder. There is a deep, 4-foot drainage ditch running along both sides of the asphalt. If guests park on the street, their tires will be on the main roadway. That narrows the road down to a single lane. If 2 cars try to pass each other from opposite directions, traffic will grind to a halt. More importantly, if a vehicle blocks even a portion of the driving lane, it violates the county fire lane ordinance. If an emergency vehicle, like an ambulance or a fire engine, cannot pass through this street with full clearance, the police have the authority to tow every single vehicle instantly at the owner's expense. Oh, please, Chloe scoffed, throwing her hands in the air. It's a country road. There's barely any traffic out here. Who is even going to notice? The cops out here have better things to do than write parking tickets. Everyone can just park with 2 wheels on your grass, or they can just park along the ditch. People will figure it out. Stop trying to find problems for every single thing I want to do. So no designated off-site parking and no shuttle service, I noted, writing it down. Guests will park on the county road and on my lawn. Perfect. Now, let's talk about the city event permits and the noise ordinance waivers. Aunt Susan let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Permits for a backyard wedding. You have got to be joking. It's a private residence. You can do whatever you want on your own property. That's the entire point of owning land. Actually, Susan, that's a common misconception, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms, channeling the exact phrasing of the municipal code I had memorized. Our township has a strict short-term assembly ordinance. Any gathering on residential property exceeding 50 individuals that involves commercial elements, such as paid vendors, hired staff, or public promotion, is legally classified as a commercial temporary event. To host it legally, you are required to submit an application to the city zoning board at least 30 days in advance, pay a $500 registration fee, and obtain a temporary commercial assembly permit. And if we don't? Chloe asked, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. If you don't, the event is operating illegally in a residential zone. Furthermore, the township enforces a strict noise ordinance after 9 o'clock on weekends. Any amplified sound, like a DJ's sound system, a live band, or a professional PA system, that can be heard from more than 50 feet past the property line is subject to an immediate noise violation citation. To play music past 9, you need a noise ordinance waiver approved by the city council. This is unbelievable, Aunt Susan said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and utter contempt. She leaned across the counter, staring into my eyes with a venom that would have terrified me a year ago. You are sitting here, throwing a mountain of bureaucratic garbage at your own flesh and blood, trying to extort money out of us for pieces of paper and plastic toilets. A permit, a noise waiver, it's a cash grab by the city. It's a stupid, pointless rule designed to bleed people dry, and we are not playing along with your little power trip. Susan, I'm just trying to protect us from fines. No, Chloe erupted, stomping her foot against the hardwood floor so hard her straw hat shook. No, you're not trying to protect anyone. You're trying to kill my vibe. You've been doing this since we were kids. Whenever I have something special, whenever the attention is on me, you have to find a way to make it miserable, to make it about you and your stupid, boring rules. I am an influencer. This wedding is going to be seen by hundreds of thousands of people. I am not going to ruin my aesthetic with ugly white plastic toilets, and I am not going to spend thousands of dollars on city permits just to satisfy your pathetic jealousy. Chloe, calm down, sweetie, think of your skin, Susan coaxed, putting a soothing hand on her daughter's shoulder before turning back to me, her eyes burning. Let me make one thing crystal clear to you. We are not buying permits. We are not getting a noise waiver. We are not renting toilets. We are going to have this wedding exactly how Chloe envisioned it. Chase is going to film it, the DJ is going to play the music, the guests are going to park where they can find a spot, and they will use your bathrooms. You will run the kitchen, you will clear the willow tree, and you will paint that fence. If you so much as mention a single city rule or a dollar amount to us again, I will personally ensure that your mother, your uncles, your grandparents, and every cousin in this family never speaks your name again. We will cut you out so completely you won't even be invited to Thanksgiving. Do you understand me? The kitchen was dead silent. My mother had buried her face in her hands, trembling, unable to look at either of us. Chase was pretending to adjust the focus ring on his lens, suddenly very interested in the texture of my kitchen tiles. I looked at Aunt Susan. I looked at Chloe, whose chest was heaving with performative anger, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to do what I had always done. Swallow my pride, apologize for causing trouble, and destroy myself to keep them happy. Instead, I took a deep, slow breath, feeling the absolute certainty of the trap snap shut in my mind. I understand completely, I said, my voice smooth, calm, and entirely submissive. I closed the legal pad with a soft, definitive click. I apologize, you're right. It's Chloe's special day, and I shouldn't be letting logistics get in the way of a beautiful memory. Consider the matter dropped. No permits, no toilets, no waivers. We'll do it entirely your way. Aunt Susan smirked, a triumphant, ugly look of absolute victory washing over her face. She adjusted her sunglasses, smoothing down her dress. Well, it's about time you showed some family loyalty. Come along, Chloe, we have a lot of work to do. They turned and marched out of the kitchen, their heels clicking toward the front door. Chloe was already back on her phone, her voice dropping back into its rhythmic vocal fry as she spoke to her screen. Hey guys, so a little update, the venue is officially confirmed. We just had a great meeting, and everything is going to be so perfect. The front door slammed shut. The white SUV's engine roared to life, tires crunching over my lawn once more as they backed out into the street and sped away. My mother stayed behind for a moment, looking at me with wet, exhausted eyes. Thank you, sweetie, she whispered, stepping forward to touch my arm. I know it's hard with Susan, but you did the right thing. You kept the peace, it's just for one weekend. Thank you. She kissed my cheek and hurried out after them, leaving me alone in the sudden, echoing silence of my house. I stood at the kitchen island for a long time, the scent of Chloe's expensive perfume still hanging heavily in the air. I looked down at the yellow legal pad. Then, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I needed a paper trail. I needed it to be ironclad. I needed them to explicitly, unambiguously document their refusal to follow the law, so that when the hammer dropped, there would be no room for them to blame me, no room for them to claim they didn't know, and no room for my mother to defend them. I opened my messages, selected the group chat with Chloe and Aunt Susan, and began to type. Hey Chloe, hey Aunt Susan. Just wanted to follow up on our walkthrough today to make sure we're entirely on the same page for Saturday. Just to confirm, per our conversation, you are explicitly instructing me not to rent the luxury portable restrooms, $2,500, and your 210 guests will be using my home's residential septic system instead. You are also explicitly instructing me not to apply for the temporary commercial assembly permit, $500, with the city zoning board, and you are choosing not to file for the noise ordinance waiver for the DJ past 9 p.m. because you consider these municipal codes to be stupid rules and a cash grab. You are taking full responsibility for the 60-plus guest cars parking along the county road fire lanes and on my grass, and you accept all legal and financial liability for any municipal fines, towing costs, or plumbing damages that occur as a result of operating this event without city approval. Please reply to this text to confirm, so I can begin prepping the kitchen according to your orders. I hit send, my heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the screen. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes, the 3 little dots appeared. Chloe was typing, the dots disappeared, then they reappeared, furious and fast. A second later, the notification popped up. A wall of text from Chloe, sent directly to the group chat for the entire family to see. Oh my God, yes, for the 100th time, confirmed. Stop texting us this bureaucratic nonsense. You are literally ruining my mood while I am trying to design my mood boards. Yes, we don't want the ugly plastic toilets. Yes, we aren't paying the city for their stupid scam permits. Yes, people will park on the street. Stop trying to cover your ass and scare us with these imaginary fines. We said we take responsibility, so drop it and start prepping the food like you promised. Do your job as family and stop being a Karen. I stared at the screen, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face as I took a screenshot of her reply and saved it to 3 different cloud drives. She had just signed the warrant for her own destruction. The wedding was in 6 days, the guest list was public, the location was set, and as I looked out the window at the quiet, peaceful street outside my home, I realized that the countdown had officially begun. The screenshot of Chloe's text message glowed against the dark backdrop of my bedroom that Sunday night, a digital receipt of her own arrogance safely backed up to my primary, secondary, and tertiary cloud drives. I stared at her words, "Stop trying to cover your ass and scare us with these imaginary fines," and felt an extraordinary, chilling sensation wash over me. It was the absolute evaporation of guilt. For decades, the invisible chains of familial obligation had dictated my choices, forcing me to swallow my resentment, tolerate their cruelty, and subsidize their vanity. But Chloe had just handed me a pair of bolt cutters. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, bright clarity. The countdown had officially begun, and I had exactly 5 days to execute a flawless pivot from a reluctant victim to a meticulously compliant host. Malicious compliance is an art form. It requires absolute precision, an unwavering smile, and the total suspension of your own ego while you allow your opponent to construct their own gallows. I could not afford a single slip-up. If I showed even a hint of resistance, if I sighed too loudly or questioned a single decision, Aunt Susan's radar would ping, and she might actually look into the laws she was so eagerly flouting. I needed them to believe I was entirely broken, thoroughly subjugated, and ready to play my part as the unpaid servant at Chloe's royal court. My first task was the preservation of my own sanctuary. If 200 people were going to descend upon my property under the banner of an unpermitted, law-breaking influencer circus, I had to ensure that the damage to my personal property was strictly minimized. I took a week off from my remote tech job, logging an official vacation request under the guise of family wedding preparation. My manager congratulated me on being a good sibling figure. I smiled at the camera and thanked him, knowing my true labor for the week was going to be far more industrial. On Tuesday morning, I rented a 10-foot enclosed moving truck from a local depot, parking it out of sight behind the detached garage. Then, I began the quiet, exhausting process of evacuating my home's interior. I started with the valuables and the sentimental items. My grandfather's antique drafting table, my collection of rare first-edition fiction books, my expensive audio equipment, and every piece of breakable porcelain or glassware I owned were carefully wrapped in bubble wrap and packed into the back of the truck. Next came the furniture. Chloe had explicitly demanded that I move my outdoor cedar furniture to clear space for her boho chic lounge areas, but I didn't stop there. I went through the main floor of my house and dismantled anything that wasn't bolted down. The guest bedroom, the very room that would undoubtedly become a staging ground for drunk bridesmaids or a makeshift coat closet, was stripped down to the bare mattress. I removed the linen curtains, the decorative rugs, and the bedside tables, leaving it looking like a bleak, institutional cell. I locked the door to the master suite, the home office, and the basement from the inside, reinforcing the deadbolts and checking the hinges. If 200 people were going to be denied adequate restroom facilities, they would inevitably begin hunting for secluded corners of my house to misbehave. I intended to make sure 90% of my home was an impenetrable fortress. By Wednesday afternoon, it was time to address the most heartbreaking part of their demands, the koi pond. I stood by the water's edge, watching the heavy, brilliant orange and white shapes of the fish glide beneath the lily pads. Chase's casual suggestion to just pump the water into the woods and put the fish in buckets was a death sentence for animals that had become my daily companions. I refused to let them become casualties of this war. I had called a local commercial aquarium and pond maintenance service on Monday, explaining that I needed an emergency temporary holding solution for 7 large Japanese koi due to an upcoming property renovation. 2 professional technicians arrived in a flatbed truck loaded with a massive, industrial-grade 400-gallon aerated holding tank. It cost me $800 out of pocket, a sum that made my chest tighten, but I viewed it as an investment in my own peace of mind. I stood by and assisted as they carefully netted each fish, checking their scales and transferring them into the oxygenated, temperature-controlled water of the mobile tank. Watching the water lilies being pulled from their pots and stored in damp burlap bags felt like a violation. But as the technicians drove away with my fish safely secured, a massive weight lifted from my shoulders. The pond itself was now nothing more than a deep, empty concrete basin, its bottom lined with a thin layer of dark sediment and smooth river stones. Per Chloe's explicit instructions, I went to the local lumber yard and purchased several heavy sheets of marine-grade 3/4-inch plywood and thick 2x4 pressure-treated studs. I spent 5 hours in the blazing sun constructing a sturdy, reinforced wooden deck over the top of the empty pond. I hammered the final nails into place, testing the structure by jumping on it. It was rock solid. It was perfectly level. It was exactly what Chase had asked for, a flawless, elevated platform for a high-powered DJ booth, sitting directly on top of a dry, hollow echo chamber. I smiled as I swept the sawdust off the wood, imagining the acoustic resonance that would occur later in the week. Thursday morning brought the first wave of the physical invasion. A massive commercial box truck from a wholesale food distributor backed down my driveway, its brakes squealing as it ground to a halt right over the ruined turf of my front lawn. The driver emerged with a clipboard, looking thoroughly annoyed by the lack of a proper loading dock. "Are you the kitchen coordinator?" he asked, throwing open the rear doors of the truck to reveal pallets of raw ingredients. "That's me," I said, putting on my most cheerful, accommodating customer service voice. "Bring it all inside." For the next 2 hours, my kitchen was transformed into a high-volume commercial storage facility. Cases of raw, untrimmed beef flank steak, dozens of plastic tubs of raw shrimp packed in melting ice, industrial-sized bags of unpeeled onions, crates of cilantro, and hundreds of corn tortillas were stacked high on my quartz countertops and packed into my refrigerator. My double convection oven was completely blocked by stacks of aluminum catering trays. The smell of raw onions and butcher paper immediately began to permeate the house, replacing the clean scent of cedar and lavender I usually maintained. Just as the delivery truck pulled away, Aunt Susan's white SUV rolled up the driveway, followed by a battered pickup truck carrying 2 exhausted-looking teenage boys from down the street. Susan climbed out of her car, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting around the property with predatory efficiency. "All right, the help is here," she announced, gesturing dismissively toward the 2 teenagers who were staring at their phones. "Boys, this is the kitchen coordinator. You take your orders from them until Saturday. Everything needs to be prepped, chopped, and marinated by tomorrow night. I don't want to see a single unchopped onion when the bridal party arrives for the rehearsal." "Good morning, Aunt Susan," I said, stepping forward with a bright, wide-eyed compliance that seemed to catch her slightly off guard. "The food looks incredible. I've already mapped out the preparation schedule. We're going to start trimming the meat immediately. Don't you worry about a single thing. The kitchen is completely under control." Susan narrowed her eyes through her designer sunglasses, looking for the trap, searching for the resistance she was so used to encountering from me. But finding nothing but eager submission, her shoulders relaxed, and her posture shifted back into its natural state of haughty superiority. "Well, good," she muttered, checking her watch. "Chloe is at a spray tan appointment, and then we have the final dress fitting. The rental company is bringing the 200 white resin chairs and the tables tomorrow morning at 8. You need to be outside to show them where to unload. They need to be set up in perfect rows facing the weeping willow. And remember, the lower branches of that tree need to be addressed." "I have the tools ready to go, Aunt Susan," I lied smoothly, gesturing toward a chainsaw that was sitting prominently on the porch, unfueled and chainless, completely non-functional, but looking thoroughly menacing. I'll make sure the camera lines are perfectly clear. Excellent, she said, turning back to her car without a word of thanks. Make sure those boys work hard. We're paying them cash, and I don't want them slacking off on our dime. As her car disappeared down the road, I turned to the two teenagers, who were looking at me with a mixture of dread and boredom. I knew these kids, they lived 3 houses down, good kids who were just trying to earn some extra money for the summer. All right, guys, listen up, I said, my tone dropping the fake cheerfulness and becoming warm, relaxed, and honest. Here's the deal. We have a mountain of prep work to do, but I am not going to run you like a sweatshop. We're going to take regular breaks, I'm going to blast some music in the kitchen, and as long as we get the meat marinating and the veggies chopped by Friday night, we're golden. Sound good? The boys visibly relaxed, nodding eagerly. For the next 2 days, my kitchen became an assembly line of malicious compliance. We chopped 40 pounds of onions, trimmed 80 pounds of beef, and prepared gallons of fresh salsa. I ensured that every single item was prepped exactly according to the wholesale menu Chloe had provided, leaving absolutely no room for her to claim that I had neglected my duties as head of catering. I worked alongside the boys, sweating over the prep tables, keeping them fueled with pizza and soda, earning their absolute loyalty. I needed them to perform flawlessly on Saturday, not for Chloe, but for the grand production I was staging. Friday morning brought the rental truck, and with it, the physical transformation of my backyard into an illegal commercial venue. 2 delivery drivers began unloading stacks of white resin chairs and massive, circular wooden tables, dragging them across my lawn. They didn't care about the grass. They dragged the heavy items carelessly, leaving long, brown gouges in the turf. I watched from the patio, sipping my coffee, feeling a strange detachment. A week ago, this sight would have broken my heart. Today, it was simply scenery being moved onto a stage. By Friday evening, the backyard looked exactly like Chloe's vision board come to life. The tables were set up in a massive semicircle around the patio. The white chairs were arranged in 200 perfect, symmetrical units facing the massive weeping willow. Chase arrived late in the afternoon to set up the DJ equipment on the plywood platform over the empty koi pond. He brought massive, industrial-sized speaker towers that looked like they belonged at an outdoor music festival rather than a residential backyard gathering. He spent an hour testing the bass, the vibrations rattling the windows of my house and causing the empty concrete basin beneath the plywood to hum with a deep, echoing thud. Man, this acoustic setup is wild, Chase said, wiping sweat from his forehead as he walked up to the patio where I was standing. The bass feels twice as loud because of the hollow space underneath. This is gonna be epic. It really is, Chase, I said, smiling warmly at him. The sound is going to carry beautifully. It's going to echo across the entire valley. Everyone within a 2-mile radius is going to hear this party. Awesome, he grinned, completely missing the double meaning. Chloe is gonna love it. The rehearsal on Friday evening was a brief, chaotic storm of vanity. Chloe arrived with her 8 bridesmaids, all of them dressed in varying shades of beige and terracotta, holding iced coffees and complaining about the humidity. Aunt Susan barked orders like a drill sergeant, forcing the bridal party to walk down the flagstone path repeatedly to ensure their pacing matched the rhythm of the pre-recorded processional music. Chloe didn't look at me once, completely ignoring my presence as I stood near the kitchen door, quietly observing the layout. My mother tried to catch my eye, offering a nervous, exhausted smile that I returned with a reassuring nod. Everything looks perfect, sweetie, my mother whispered to me during a brief break in the rehearsal, looking around the yard. You really outdid yourself. Look how happy Chloe is. I just want to make sure it's an unforgettable day, Mom, I said smoothly. An event the whole town will be talking about. By 10 o'clock Friday night, the property was finally dark and silent. The bridal party had left for a lavish rehearsal dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown, an expense they had gladly paid for, unlike the city permits. I sat at my kitchen island in the quiet house, the heavy scent of cilantro and marinated beef hanging in the air. It was time for the final phase of the preparation. The trap needed to be set with absolute legal and bureaucratic precision. I opened my laptop and pulled up the official website for our county's municipal services. I didn't want to make a simple, frantic phone call on Saturday afternoon. Voice reports can be ignored, misrouted, or delayed by busy dispatchers. I wanted a digital, immutable paper trail that forced the city officials to act immediately due to high-priority safety and zoning violations. I started with the Office of the Fire Marshal. I accessed their online public hazard reporting portal, entering my own address with a cold, steady hand. I filled out the form with clinical detail, using the exact terminology of the municipal fire code, reporting an unpermitted, high-volume commercial temporary assembly scheduled for Saturday, May 23rd, at approximately 4 p.m. The event involves a crowd estimate of over 200 individuals on a residential property with restricted access. Commercial catering operations utilizing open-flame propane burners and high-voltage electrical equipment are being operated out of a private residential kitchen without a commercial health or fire safety inspection. Furthermore, guest vehicles are instructed to park along the narrow two-lane county road, which will completely obstruct the designated fire lane and prevent emergency vehicle access to the surrounding residential neighborhood. Immediate inspection and intervention are requested to prevent a catastrophic public safety hazard. I attached a screenshot of Chloe's public Instagram post announcing the wedding location, date, and time, along with her text message explicitly confirming that they were refusing to apply for the necessary permits or coordinate with city traffic enforcement. I hit submit. The portal generated a tracking number, FM 2026 to 8849. Next, I opened the portal for the Township Zoning and Code Enforcement Board. I drafted a separate, equally precise report regarding the violation of the short-term assembly ordinance, reporting an illegal commercial enterprise operating within a Class 1 residential zone. A temporary commercial venue has been established for a large-scale event involving over 200 attendees, hired commercial staff, and professional entertainment vendors. The organizers have explicitly refused to apply for the required temporary commercial assembly permit or pay the registration fees, as documented in the attached correspondence. The event lacks the legally mandated sanitation infrastructure, as the organizers are refusing to provide portable restrooms, creating an imminent public health and environmental hazard to the local water table via the oversaturation of a residential septic system. Amplified commercial sound equipment has been installed and is scheduled to operate past the legal noise ordinance threshold without a city council waiver. I attached the same screenshots, along with a digital copy of the county's own septic capacity guidelines, highlighting the inevitable failure of a residential tank under a 700 flush load. I hit submit, tracking number, C 2026 to 4412. Finally, I opened the non-emergency reporting portal for the County Sheriff's Department. I submitted a traffic hazard advisory, informing them that a massive influx of vehicles would be illegally parking along the county road starting at 3:30 p.m. on Saturday, blocking the driving lanes and creating an immediate collision risk on a high-speed rural roadway. I provided them with the exact time of the ceremony, noting that the obstruction would be at its peak between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, the silence of the room suddenly feeling incredibly heavy. The dominoes were set. The legal machinery of the county was incredibly slow when you wanted something approved, but when a documented, high-priority public safety hazard with an attached paper trail was dropped into their automated system, the liability shifted directly to the city. If an official ignored a report about a blocked fire lane and a fire actually occurred, their career was over. They would be forced to respond. They would have no choice but to deploy their enforcement officers to protect the city from liability. I walked out onto the back patio, stepping onto the flagstone path in the cool night air. The moon was a bright, silver crescent reflecting off the plywood deck that covered the empty koi pond. The white resin chairs stood in the darkness like a silent, ghostly audience, waiting for the performance to begin. I felt no malice. I felt no anger. I felt only the deep, profound satisfaction of a mathematician who had just solved a complex equation. Chloe and Aunt Susan believed that their desires were more powerful than the law. that their social media vanity exempted them from the rules that governed the rest of society. They had treated my home, my labor, and my life as disposable props for their digital fantasy. Tomorrow, the reality of the physical world was going to collide with their digital illusion at 80 miles an hour. I went to bed and slept soundly for the first time in a week. Saturday morning arrived with a brutal, cloudless brilliance. By noon, the temperature had climbed to 85 degrees, the air thick with a heavy, oppressive humidity that made the leaves of the weeping willow hang perfectly still. At 1 o'clock, the storm arrived. Two massive passenger vans pulled up the driveway, spilling out the bridal party and a small army of hair and makeup artists. Aunt Susan marched into the house like a general entering a conquered territory, her voice barking orders before her boots had even crossed the threshold. "Kitchen, where is the head of catering?" she yelled, slamming her bag onto the counter. "Right here, Aunt Susan," I said, stepping out of the kitchen wearing a clean, professional white apron. The two neighborhood boys were behind me, already dressed in neat black shirts, cutting lemons and setting out the serving platters. The beef is shredded, the shrimp is chilled, and the ovens are preheating. The food will be ready for the cocktail hour the exact second the ceremony ends. Susan looked at the kitchen, her eyes sweeping over the immaculate organization, the rows of prepared food trays, the sparkling cleanliness of the space. She let out a short, tight grunt, clearly annoyed that she couldn't find a single flaw to criticize. "Fine," she snapped. "Chloe is going to be getting ready in the guest room. Do not disturb her. Chase's media team is setting up their cameras outside. Make sure your boys don't get in the way of the lenses." "Of course," I said, bowing my head slightly. "We will be completely invisible." By 3 o'clock, the property was crawling with people. The first wave of guests began to arrive, their luxury sedans and heavy SUVs turning off the county road and onto my driveway. As expected, the driveway filled up within 5 minutes. The remaining cars had no choice but to park along the shoulder of the narrow asphalt road. I stood by the kitchen window, watching through the blinds as guest after guest maneuvered their vehicles onto the soft grass of the drainage ditch. Tires sank into the mud, tearing up the wildflowers and blocking the white line of the driving lane. Within half an hour, a long, glittering line of 60 cars stretched down the county road in both directions, narrowing the street down to a precarious single lane of traffic. It was exactly the hazard I had described to the fire marshal. Inside the house, the pressure was mounting. The 3 residential bathrooms were already facing a continuous line of guests. The sound of toilets flushing echoed through the walls every 90 seconds. I walked past the main hallway bathroom and noticed a thin, ominous trickle of water beginning to pool around the base of the porcelain bowl. The septic tank was already struggling to process the sudden, violent influx of liquid waste. At 3:45, the music began to swell from the backyard. Chase's massive speaker towers roared to life, the deep, heavy thud of a generic acoustic pop cover vibrating through the floorboards of the kitchen. The bass was immense, bouncing off the concrete basin beneath the plywood deck, creating an aggressive, low-frequency hum that could undoubtedly be heard miles down the road. I walked out onto the back patio, taking my place near the catering prep tables. The backyard was a sea of beige, terracotta, and oversized hats. 200 people sat in the white resin chairs, fanning themselves with the printed program fans, their faces flushed from the heat and the lack of air conditioning. At exactly 4 o'clock, the music shifted. The heavy, dramatic chords of the processional began to play. The double doors of the guest room opened, and Chloe emerged, looking undeniably stunning in an elaborate, lace-trimmed boho wedding gown. Her face was locked in a radiant, performative smile as she clutched her father's arm. Ahead of her, 2 professional videographers walked backward down the flagstone path, their cameras mounted on stabilized rigs, live streaming her grand entrance directly to 80,000 people on Instagram. Chloe stepped onto the lawn, her dress trailing over the crushed grass. She walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on Chase, who stood beneath the weeping willow, looking properly emotional for the cameras. The crowd stood, a chorus of collective gasps and whispered praises echoing through the yard. Aunt Susan stood at the front row, tears welling in her eyes, her face twisted into an expression of supreme, absolute triumph. She looked back at me for a fraction of a second, her eyes gleaming with a silent, arrogant boast. "We took your house, we broke your rules, and we won." I smiled back at her, a genuine, radiant smile of pure anticipation. I checked the watch on my wrist. It was 4:15. Chloe reached the altar. The officiant stepped forward, raised his hands, and welcomed the crowd. The music faded into a low, ambient hum. The videographers zoomed in for the close-up shots of the couple's faces. The backyard fell into a breathless, reverent silence, broken only by the gentle rustle of the willow leaves. "We are gathered here today," the officiant began, his voice amplified through the massive speaker system, "to celebrate the union of Chloe and Chase." And then, from the distant edge of the property, a new sound cut through the air. It was faint at first, a low, rhythmic wail that rose and fell against the heat. But within seconds, it grew louder, sharper, and unmistakably closer. It wasn't one siren. It was a chorus of them, the high-pitched, aggressive shriek of city police cruisers, accompanied by the deep, air horn blare of a massive emergency vehicle. The officiant paused, frowning, looking toward the side of the house. The guests shifted in their seats, turning their heads toward the driveway. Chloe's radiant smile flickered for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting nervously toward Aunt Susan. The sound of the sirens didn't pass by the house. They grew deafeningly loud, the screech of heavy tires roaring down the gravel driveway. Through the gap between the house and the detached garage, I saw the flashing, strobing lights, brilliant, blinding bursts of red and blue that painted the beige walls of my home in a violent, chaotic rhythm. One police cruiser, two cruisers, a massive, bright red fire engine, and behind them, a sleek, official city sedan with the words Township Code Enforcement printed in bold black letters on the side. The vehicles didn't just park. They pulled directly onto the property, their engines roaring as they blocked the entire entrance. A team of uniform officers, a heavily geared fire marshal, and two stern-faced code enforcement officials climbed out of the vehicles, their clipboards and radios clutched in their hands as they marched directly toward the backyard. The illusion was shattered, the performance was over, and as the fire marshal raised a heavy, black bullhorn to his mouth, the entire 200-person crowd froze in absolute terror. The crackle of the fire marshal's bullhorn was a physical shockwave that ripped through the humid, suffocating silence of my backyard. It was a harsh, mechanical squawk that completely severed the delicate, performative reality Chloe had spent 6 months constructing. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please," the fire marshal's voice boomed, amplified to a deafening, authoritarian volume that instantly flattened the romantic ambient music dripping from Chase's sound system. "This event is being conducted in direct violation of municipal code and public safety ordinances. I am ordering an immediate cessation of all activities on this property. This assembly is unauthorized, unpermitted, and unsafe. You are ordered to disperse immediately." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The entire crowd of 200 people sat frozen in their white resin chairs, their faces locked in a collective expression of utter, uncomprehending shock. It was as if the human brain could not process the sudden transition from a high-end, boho chic lifestyle event to a localized police raid. Chloe stood at the altar, her hands still clutched in Chase's, her jaw dropped so low I could see the perfect veneer of her teeth. The two videographers, acting entirely on professional instinct, kept their cameras rolling, their stabilized rigs panning smoothly from Chloe's pale face to the vanguard of city officials marching down my flagstone path. Then, the explosion happened. Aunt Susan didn't just stand up, she launched herself from the front row like a surface-to-air missile. Her clipboard was clutched in her hand like a weapon, her face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson that completely ruined her expensive, camera-ready makeup. She charged toward the fire marshal, her high heels sinking deeply into the soft turf, throwing her off balance but failing to slow her momentum. "What is the meaning of this?" Susan screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her fury, completely bypassing any attempt at politeness. "How dare you interrupt my daughter's wedding? This is a private residence. You have absolutely no right to be here. Get those vehicles out of our driveway and turn off those ridiculous lights immediately." The fire marshal, a burly, weathered man named Officer Miller, whose name badge gleamed under the harsh afternoon sun, didn't flinch. He lowered the bullhorn, looking down at Susan through a pair of wire-rimmed aviator sunglasses, with the cold, unbothered detachment of a man who spent his life dealing with hysterical homeowners. "Ma'am, I am the county fire marshal," he said, his voice calm, measured, and entirely unyielding. "And this is a residential property currently operating an unpermitted commercial temporary assembly. We received a high-priority safety report detailing multiple severe violations of the municipal code. As of 10 minutes ago, your guest vehicles have completely obstructed the county road fire lanes for over a quarter of a mile in both directions. If a house down this street catches fire right now, my engines cannot pass. That is an immediate, actionable public safety hazard." "It's a country road," Susan shrieked, her hands flailing wildly. "Nobody cares about the road. People can just drive around. You are ruining her special day. Do you have any idea how much money this cost? Do you know who my daughter is?" While Susan was screaming at the fire marshal, the two code enforcement officers, dressed in crisp, navy blue polo shirts with the township seal embroidered on the chest, separated from the group. One of them, a stern-faced woman carrying a digital tablet, walked directly toward the patio where I was standing next to the catering tables. The other officer marched straight toward Chase's elevated DJ booth, which was still humming with a low-frequency vibration. "Are you the property owner?" the female officer asked me, her pen hovering over the tablet. "I am," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and entirely cooperative. I wiped my hands on my white apron, stepping forward with an expression of deep, performative concern. "I'm the homeowner. What seems to be the problem, officer?" "We received a formal complaint regarding an illegal commercial operation in a Class 1 residential zone," she stated, her eyes sweeping over the 200 guests, the commercial catering trays, and the massive speaker towers. "Our records show that no temporary commercial assembly permit was ever applied for or issued for this address. Furthermore, we have a report regarding an imminent public health hazard involving inadequate sanitation infrastructure. Sir, do you have portable restroom facilities on site for a crowd of this size?" "I do not," I said, shaking my head with a heavy, sorrowful sigh. "I explicitly warned the event organizers, my aunt and my cousin, that a residential septic system cannot handle 200 people. I provided them with the legal requirements and the pricing for luxury restroom trailers weeks ago, but they flatly refused to secure them. They told me the city rules were a scam and ordered me to let the guests use my indoor bathrooms." The officer's eyebrows shot up. She tapped her tablet rapidly. "They explicitly refused. Do you have documentation of this communication?" "I certainly do," I said, pulling my phone from my apron pocket. I unlocked the screen, displaying the ironclad screenshot of Chloe's group chat text message. "Yes, we don't want the ugly plastic toilets. Yes, we aren't paying the city for their stupid scam permits. We said we take responsibility, so drop it." The officer leaned in, reading the text carefully. A cold, professional smile touched her lips. "Excellent, sir. Please email a copy of this screenshot to the address I'm texting to your phone right now. This establishes clear, premeditated intent to bypass municipal health codes by the event organizers. It absolves you of primary liability for the zoning violation, as you are a non-consenting party under duress from familial trespass." "Sending it right now, officer," I murmured, my thumb tapping the screen with an almost algorithmic precision. Sent. The digital paper trail was officially embedded in the city's enforcement database. Meanwhile, a collective gasp erupted from the center of the yard. I looked up to see the second code enforcement officer pulling the main power cables out of Chase's DJ booth. The ambient music died instantly, replaced by the sudden, raw sound of Chloe's ragged breathing echoing across the lawn. Chloe had finally snapped out of her paralysis. She dropped her bouquet into the dirt, her expensive lace train gathering mud as she ran toward the fire marshal, her phone clutched in her hand, the camera still angled perfectly at her own face. She was actively streaming. The little red, live icon in the corner of her screen was undoubtedly flashing, as tens of thousands of people watched the collapse of her empire in real time. "You can't do this," Chloe sobbed, her voice ascending into a piercing, hysterical wail that vibrated across the entire 3-acre lot. "Look at me, I am live right now. 85,000 people are watching you bully a bride. This is my wedding. You are violating my civil rights. Chase, do something. Tell them who we are. Chase stepped down from the altar, looking utterly useless, his hands shoved into the pockets of his beige linen trousers. Hey man, he muttered to a police officer. Can we just talk about this? Can we just pay a fine right now and keep the party going? We have influencers here from out of state. Son, this isn't a parking ticket you can just pay off. The police officer responded, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. This is a mandatory shutdown. The fire marshal has declared this road an active hazard. Code enforcement has issued a stop work order on the commercial catering and entertainment. We are towing the vehicles blocking the lane. Every single person in these chairs needs to stand up, walk to their cars, and clear this area immediately. Anyone remaining on the property in 15 minutes will be cited for obstruction and criminal trespass. The word towed acted like a grenade dropped into the crowd of guests. Suddenly, the collective loyalty to Chloe's special day vanished, replaced by the raw, unadulterated panic of upscale suburbanites realizing their luxury vehicles were about to be hooked up to county wreckers. A loud, chaotic murmur tore through the rows of chairs. People stood up, knocking over their programs, their terracotta-colored shawls dragging in the grass as they began a frantic, uncoordinated stampede toward the front yard. "Wait! Don't leave!" Chloe screamed, turning in a circle, her arms extended toward her retreating guests. "The catering hasn't even started. The grazing table is inside. We have a sponsored cocktail hour. Please just stay in your seats." It's a misunderstanding. But nobody was listening. The lifestyle bloggers, the distant cousins, the college friends, they were all fleeing. The videographers, realizing the romantic fairytale content was dead, pivoted entirely to capturing the raw, high-stakes drama of the evacuation, their lenses capturing the absolute chaos of 200 people sprinting toward a narrow county road while police sirens strobed against the trees. Aunt Susan was losing her mind. She tried to physically block a police officer from walking back to his cruiser, shoving her clipboard against his chest. "You are not towing anything. I demand to speak to your supervisor. This is a political hit job. My brother-in-law knows the mayor." "Ma'am, step back," the officer warned, his voice dropping into a dangerous, low register. "If you touch me again, you will be placed in handcuffs for assaulting an officer. Step away from the vehicle." My mother ran out from the crowd, her face white with terror, grabbing Susan by the waist and pulling her back before she could get herself arrested. "Susan, stop, stop, you're making it worse." "Look at Chloe." I looked at Chloe. It was a sight that will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. She had dropped to her knees right in the middle of the aisle, her pristine white gown soaking up the dark, muddy water from the soft turf where the heavy rental tables had gouged the soil. Her oversized straw hat had fallen off, rolling into a patch of weeds. She was holding her phone in front of her face, her chest heaving with violent, ugly sobs, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick, black rivers. "They ruined it," she wept into the screen, her voice cracking completely as she broadcasted her total humiliation to the internet. "The city, the police, they hate me, they shut us down. My whole wedding is gone. Everything is ruined. I don't have a venue, I don't have a reception. Look what they did to me." The live chat on her screen was scrolling so fast it was a blur. A chaotic mix of sympathetic fan emojis, confused questions, and a massive, sudden influx of local people laughing at the sheer absurdity of an unpermitted backyard wedding being raided by the fire department. Her carefully curated aesthetic, her brand partnerships, her 100,000-follower campaign, it was all disintegrating in a cloud of flashing blue light and diesel exhaust from the fire truck. Within 20 minutes, the backyard was a ghost town. The 200 white resin chairs sat completely empty, scattered and knocked over like a stadium after a riot. The massive circular tables were bare, their linen cloths fluttering in the hot breeze. The county road outside was filled with the loud, mechanical beep of 3 heavy-duty tow trucks that had arrived with terrifying speed, immediately hooking up the first 5 luxury SUVs that were blocking the fire lane. Guests were standing along the ditch, screaming at the tow truck drivers, waving their wallets, and frantically trying to move their cars before the chains were secured. The female code enforcement officer walked back over to me, holding a thick, official-looking document printed on bright yellow carbon paper. She handed me a pen. "Sir, as the property owner, you need to sign this acknowledgement of inspection," she said. As I stated, based on the electronic evidence you provided, the primary citations and municipal fines are being issued directly to the event organizers listed in this text communication, specifically Chloe Evans and Susan Evans. They are being cited for unauthorized commercial operation in a residential zone, intentional bypass of health and sanitation permits, and operating an amplified sound system without a municipal waiver. The baseline fine for these combined violations is $7,500. I signed the paper with a smooth, elegant flourish, handing the pen back to her. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your efficiency in ensuring the safety of our neighborhood." Furthermore, she continued, looking over her shoulder at the empty house, the fire marshal is issuing a separate citation to the organizers for obstruction of a designated fire lane, which carries a $3,000 penalty, plus the individual towing fees for every vehicle removed from the roadway. Total municipal fines, as of right now, stand at $10,500. $10,500, plus the cost of the wholesale food they couldn't eat, the rental furniture they couldn't use, and the total destruction of Chloe's reputation. It was a financial and social nuclear strike. "Thank you, officer," I said, my heart singing a glorious, silent anthem of pure, unadulterated victory. "Have a wonderful evening." As the code enforcement sedan and the police cruisers began to slowly back out of my driveway, their mission accomplished, the heavy silence of the semi-rural evening began to settle back over the property. The sirens were finally turned off, leaving only the distant, fading rumble of the fire engine as it cleared the road. I stood on the patio, watching the remnants of my family cluster near the front gate. Aunt Susan was sitting on the hood of her SUV, her head in her hands, her clipboard shattered on the gravel beside her. My mother was standing next to her, rubbing her back, looking completely drained. Chloe was still sitting in the mud in the backyard, Chase standing a few feet away from her, looking down at his camera with a dazed, confused expression. Slowly, Chloe pushed herself up from the ground. Her dress was ruined, covered in black streaks of soil and grass stains. She turned around, her eyes scanning the empty yard until they finally locked onto me. She walked toward the patio, her breath coming in ragged, trembling gasps. Her face was no longer beautiful, it was a mask of pure, unbridled hatred. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking as she stepped up to the edge of the patio. "You did this." "Did what, Chloe?" I asked, my voice dripping with an innocent, concerned warmth that I knew would drive her absolutely insane. "You called them," she screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling, mud-stained finger at my chest. "You called the city, you called the cops, you ruined my life. You planned this whole thing." Aunt Susan and my mother, hearing the screaming, came running around the side of the house, their faces tight with renewed tension. "What?" Susan gasped, staring at me. "You called the city on your own family." "I did exactly what you told me to do, Aunt Susan," I said, my tone shifting into something cold, hard, and utterly unyielding. I stood up straight, throwing my shoulders back, looking down at them from the elevated patio. I kept the peace, I smiled and I played along. I prepped 80 pounds of beef, I set up the tables. I reinforced the deck for your boyfriend's speakers. I followed every single order you gave me. "You called the cops?" Chloe shrieked, tears leaking out again. "No, Chloe," I said, crossing my arms. "You called the cops on yourself the second you decided that the laws of this county didn't apply to you. I explicitly warned you, in writing, about the permits. I warned you about the fire lanes. I warned you about the noise ordinance. I warned you about the septic tank. And your exact response, which is now sitting in the permanent enforcement database of the city zoning board, was that you took full responsibility and told me to stop being a Karen. Well, congratulations. You took responsibility, and the city just handed you the bill." Aunt Susan stepped forward, her teeth bared, her corporate manager persona entirely gone, replaced by a raw, vicious desperation. "You bitter, jealous little parasite. We are your family, we subsidized your entire childhood, we let you exist in our circle. How dare you turn a government agency against us? You are dead to this family. Do you hear me? Dead. Your grandfather will hear about this. Your uncles will hear about this. You will never be invited to a single holiday as long as you live. Good, I said. The word was a single, heavy stone dropped into the quiet air. Susan froze, her mouth open, completely unprepared for a reality where her ultimate threat carried absolutely no power. Good, I repeated, leaning over the patio railing, looking her directly in the eyes. Cut me out, block my number. Erase me from the family tree. I have spent 30 years watching you turn every single milestone in my life into a footnote for Chloe's vanity. I built this house, I cleared this land, and I created a life for myself without a single ounce of your support. And then you had the absolute, staggering audacity to march onto my property, ruin my lawn, demand I cut my trees, kill my fish, and run myself ragged as your unpaid slave, all because your daughter wanted a pretty background for her internet friends. We're family, my mother sobbed from the back, her hands over her mouth. Why couldn't you just let her have her day? Because her day involved destroying my home, Mom, I said, looking at her with a fleeting pang of sadness that quickly solidified back into steel. And you stood right there and let her do it. You told me to smile and play along. Well, I played along. I played the game by the exact rules Chloe and Susan wrote. They said they took full responsibility. Now they get to experience what that actually means. I am going to sue you, Susan roared, stepping toward the patio steps. I am going to sue you for the cost of the catering, the rentals, the emotional distress. I will take this house from you. You can try, Susan, I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made her stop in her tracks. But before you hire a lawyer, you might want to look at the civil code for unauthorized commercial utilization of residential property. I have a recorded paper trail of you explicitly acknowledging that you were operating an illegal venue on my land without a commercial lease or insurance waiver. If you try to drag me into court, my lawyer will countersue you for property damage, fraudulent misrepresentation, and criminal trespass. And unlike you, I actually have the money to pay for a legal team. Chase clutched Chloe's arm, his face completely pale. Susan, let's go, he's right. The texts are legal confirmation. We're losing the cars right now, we need to handle the towing lot. Chloe looked at me one last time. The fiery rage in her eyes had died down, replaced by a hollow, terrifying realization of the sheer scale of her defeat. She wasn't an influencer right now. She wasn't a blushing bride. She was just a muddy, humiliated 24-year-old girl standing in a ruined backyard, facing $10,000 in fines and a viral video that would make her the laughingstock of her entire digital community. She let out a small, broken whimper, turned around, and began the long, slow walk back to the SUV, her ruined lace train dragging through the dirt like a dead weight. Aunt Susan glared at me, her eyes spitting a silent promise of eternal hatred, before turning on her heel and marching after her daughter. My mother stood on the grass for a few seconds, looking at me with an expression of profound confusion and grief, before turning and following them around the side of the house. A minute later, the white SUV's engine roared to life. It backed out of the driveway with a violent screech of tires, hitting a garbage can on the way out, before speeding down the county road and disappearing into the distance. The silence returned, the true, beautiful, uninterrupted silence of my semi-rural sanctuary. I stood on the patio for a long time, watching the sun begin its slow, golden descent behind the weeping willow. The shadows stretched long and elegant across the lawn, painting the empty white chairs in shades of deep amber and violet. I walked down the steps, stepping onto the flagstone path. I walked over to the wooden deck I had built over the empty koi pond. I sat down on the edge of the wood, dangling my legs over the side, looking at the pristine rows of hydrangeas that had survived the invasion completely untouched. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a wave of furious texts from extended family members. Instead, it was a notification from the local aquarium service. Update: your 7 Japanese koi have been successfully transferred to our long-term climate-controlled quarantine facility. They are healthy, active, and feeding well. We will await your instructions for redelivery once your property renovations are complete. I smiled, letting out a long, slow breath that carried the last remaining drops of my family's toxic influence away into the evening air. I locked my phone, slid it back into my pocket, and leaned back against the sturdy cedar railing of my patio. The backyard was messy, the grass was torn, and the rental company would be coming back tomorrow to haul away their 180 abandoned chairs. There was work to be done, dirt to be moved, and a pond to be refilled. But as I watched the first fireflies of the evening begin to blink beneath the undisturbed canopy of the massive weeping willow, I knew that every single stone of this place belonged to me. The fortress had held, the boundary had been drawn in iron and municipal code, and for the first time in my entire life, I was completely, beautifully, and permanently free.